Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the virtual lecture tonight with Mary Weaver Chapin, presented by the Portland Art Museum. I imagine we have a lot of folks joining us from all over the Northwest and maybe even the country. Mary warned us that she had lots of family that were going to join us tonight. I know Aunt Sarah is out there. And if you want to pop into the chat while we are getting going here and say hello, if you are someplace that you'd like to let us know where you're beaming in from, we always like to welcome you and see where you're coming from. So welcome. My name is Stephanie Parrish. I am the museum's Director of Learning and Community Partnerships. And to begin tonight, I would like to acknowledge the land on which the Portland Art Museum now stands. The Portland Art Museum recognizes and honors the indigenous peoples of this region. This includes the Willamette Tumwater, Clackamas, Clathlemet, Molalla, Multnomah, and Wotlala Chinook peoples, and the Tualatin Kayapua, who today are part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, and many other Native communities who have made their home along the Columbia River. We also want to recognize that Portland today is a community of many diverse Native peoples who continue to live and work here, and we respectfully acknowledge and honor all indigenous communities, past, present, and future, and are grateful for their ongoing presence and vibrant presence. So again, welcome to our special exhibition opening lecture for Private Lives, Home and Family in the Art of the Nabi, Paris, 1889 to 1900. The exhibition opened a few weeks ago and will be on view through January 23rd, 2022. And it's my pleasure tonight to be here with Mary Weaver Chapin, who is a wonderful colleague and a wonderful curator of prints and drawings. And again, my name is Stephanie Parrish. As part of our accessibility efforts, I'm going to provide a verbal description of myself. I'm a middle-aged white woman who has shoulder-length brownish hair, and I've got light hazel eyes. Tonight, I am wearing a black and white striped vest over a black top, and I'm seated in a lightly painted room with a lamp behind me. And I also want to do just a little bit of housekeeping, logistics, for those of us that maybe need a little bit of assistance with our captioning and our ASL interpretation. So we have real-time captioning that is turned on and active. If you click on the CC live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will activate those captions. The captions are fabulous. We love them, but they are not always accurate. So just keep your eye on the chat. We will put up proper spellings of things when we can, and we try to mitigate the spellings when we can. We also have ASL interpretation tonight, and I want to thank both of our interpreters, Tara Troop and Christina Healy, for being with us. And if you have any questions about access tonight, please feel free to put them into the chat. We will absolutely try and assist you. And in addition, like I said, we're doing verbal descriptions. Mary will give a verbal description a little bit later. And if you have questions as we go along, please add those to the Q&A box. You can also add them to the chat, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. So let me thank our sponsors really quickly. It of course takes a lot of folks to bring together a major exhibition like Private Lives. This is a project that Mary has been working on for many, many years, which I know she will tell us about. So big thanks to presenting sponsors, the Laura and Roger Meyer family, our exhibition series sponsors, the Robert Lehman Foundation, Helen and Amjad Bangesh, Anne Flowery and the Flowery Foundation, Frame, the Graphic Arts Council of the Portland Art Museum, Sabine Artaud Wild, Mr. and Mrs. William A. Witzel, Daniel Berskowitz and Donald Hassler, Anne and James Crumpacker, the European and American Art Council, and Susan and Jim Winkler. We also rely on public support. So thank you to the Regional Arts and Culture Council, the Oregon Arts Commission, and the Oregon Cultural Trust. And thank you to all of you members who are out there who have been so supportive over the last 18 months. It has meant a lot to all of us on staff that you continue to support the museum. And tonight, our lecture is supported in particular by the Robert Lehman Foundation, who have generally sponsored a series of talks. And I will give you reminders at the end of our lecture tonight about those upcoming talks in December and January. Okay, so that was a lot. I'm going to welcome Mary to the screen, and it is just a huge, huge pleasure to introduce her. She's just a delightful colleague. Dr. Chapin is a graduate of Wellesley College, and she received her doctorate from the Institute of Fine Arts at New York University. She's held positions at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Milwaukee Art Museum, and she is very happy to be back in the Pacific Northwest, where she was born and raised, and she's been here since 2012, when she joined the Portland Art Museum. And here at PAM, she oversees a large collection of works on paper, dating from the 15th century to today. She is a noted expert on French art and has published and lectured nationally and internationally on topics in French prints and paintings. And her favorite decade, she readily admits, is the 1890s, which she will talk about tonight. So Mary, I see you in your office. Thank you for being here, and I'm going to pass it over to you, and I'll be back for the Q&A.
Oh, great. Thanks so much, Stephanie, and welcome to everyone tonight. To provide a visual description, I am a middle-aged woman with dark curly hair and round glasses, and I am wearing a black blazer and seated in an office overflowing with books and cursed with very unflattering fluorescent lighting. But I am nonetheless delighted to be here tonight. And as we get started, I wanted to add my thanks for our very, very generous sponsors and lenders to the exhibition. I'm also deeply grateful for the work of our colleagues in the Learning and Community Partnership Department. The women you see here tonight, Jaleesa Johnston, Becky Emmert, and Stephanie Parrish, also Hannah Layson. They have all provided outstanding support for the programs presented in conjunction with this exhibition. Now, while I'm disappointed we are not all gathered together in the Witzel Auditorium for an exciting lecture tonight, it is highly apropos that we are instead each beaming in from our private homes to hear about this, an exhibition that explores the riches and the nuance of home life. It is also highly apropos that we're able to include family members and friends from all across the country. And I want to give a special acknowledgement to my dear friend and co-author and co-curator, Heather Lamonides Brown, who is joining us tonight from Cleveland, with, I presume, her charming husband, Calvin. And my sincere thanks to them for their wonderful support and excitement for this entire journey. So as I say, it's highly appropriate that we are all beaming in to from our homes to hear about home and family in this exhibition. It is also highly apropos, or perhaps painfully ironic, that this exhibition coincided with a global pandemic. Fortunately, Heather and I had completed our research and traveled to ask for loans. We had solidified our checklist. We knew what direction we were going when we got sent home in March 2020. However, we never expected to write a 302-page exhibition catalog about home, family, and pets while confined to our homes and surrounded by family and pets. While these were not ideal conditions, it gave us a rare insight into home life. And I hope that your own experience during quarantine will give you a window into this world as well. So let's dive in. Let me see if I can present my screen. And let's see, I'm waiting. Can someone give me an audible? Does that showing up okay?
No,
Not yet, Mary.
Not yet. Okay, no, okay. Let me try one more time. Okay. How's that?
Yep,
Okay.
you're good to go.
Great, thank you. Let me close this little screen. Okay, so let's dive in. And as we begin our journey tonight, I should introduce you to our starring protagonists. These are the 4 artists at the heart of the exhibition. From left to right, we have Pierre Bonnard, Maurice Denis, Felix Vallotton, the only non-French artist. He was born in Switzerland, and Edouard Vuillard. They were all young artists in Paris in the 1880s and 1890s, and several of them studied together at the Académie Julienne. In 1889, they created a loose-knit club of painters and printmakers. They gave themselves a nickname. They called themselves the Nabi, from a Hebrew term for prophet. And although they never exhibited under this title, they were united by their deep bonds of friendship and their shared desire to create a new, subjective type of art. Now, while they were never a formal association, they were more of a loose network of artists who kind of came and went throughout the decade. At one point, I think there might have been more than a dozen or so artists who were at least loosely affiliated with the Nabi. But it was these 4 artists who returned again and again to imagery of home life, private interiors, and family scenes. And it was as I was researching this topic that I thought, okay, let's put them together, the 4 of them together, and see what we can learn. So there have been major exhibitions exploring every single Nabi artist in the world, and there have been lots of monographs on this artist. But together, Heather and I really wanted to see what happens if you look at the divergent and overlapping views from these 4 men. Now, while they shared a couple common subject matter, they also shared deep bonds of friendship, spanning their entire lives, in fact. One of the last letters Vuillard wrote before his death in 1940 was, in fact, to his friend and fellow artist, Pierre Bonnard. He wrote, "Dear Bonnard, if I wrote to you every time I think about you, our past, our painting, etc., you would have enough letters to fill a library." And these deep personal bonds, I believe, contributed to the emotional depth of the paintings and prints that we are about to see. Now, before we get there, I still have one more step for us to take. And that's in order to understand the Nabi, I think it would be helpful to distinguish them from their predecessors, the Impressionists. Now, first and foremost, the Impressionist artists were a full generation, in fact, really almost 2 generations older than the Nabi. Moreover, their goals were entirely different. Here I show you Claude Monet's beautiful portrait of his wife. You will note the characteristics that were so prized, although initially ridiculed, about Impressionist art. The attention to fleeting atmospheric effects, the movement of sun, wind, and clouds, the spontaneous brushwork rendered on the spot. Everything was painted before the model, en plein air, as we say, and the focus on the optical effects of light. This, however glorious and beautiful, was not the direction the Nabis wanted to go. Rather, can remember that the final Impressionist exhibition was in 1886, when these men were just young teenagers. Instead, they were inspired by those leading the way out of Impressionism, namely Paul Gauguin. Let's see. Having trouble with my slides here. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm not able to advance. Let me just pause one moment and see if I can get there we go. Okay. So Paul Gauguin was a member, as you may know, of the Impressionists, but he was moving in a new direction. He exhibited with the Impressionists in 1879, 1881, and 1882, but he had a very, very different take. And around these years was starting to work closely with Vincent van Gogh. And he made this painting in 1888 after spending some time with Van Gogh, where they really were pushing each other with their art. It is entitled Vision of the Sermon, Jacob Wrestling with the Angel. And what we see here is an image of women dressed in traditional Breton costumes. This is an area on the far western edge of France. And what they are seeing is a scene of a man and an angel wrestling in the upper right corner. But as Gauguin relates, it is not that they are seeing this with their physical eyes. This is what they are seeing in their mind's eye after a sermon about this passage from Genesis. In a letter to his friend, Vincent van Gogh, Gauguin explained that, "For me, the landscape and the fight exist only in the imagination of the people praying after the sermon." Gauguin's philosophy and style inspired the young Nabi. Note his non-naturalistic use of color. We see this brilliant red field that is meant to represent, I don't know, the landscape or the grass, but instead he's used a coloration that does not exist in nature. Moreover, look at how he's flattened the composition. There's a tree that runs right through the painting. The figures are sort of collapsed in the foreground. You can tell that this is a big step away from the Impressionists. He's not depicting what is directly in front of him, as his Impressionist colleagues did, but what's happening in the hearts and the minds of the people depicted. And these are all characteristics of the work that we are now about to explore. Okay, again, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with my slides. I suspect that my battery is very low in my mouse. So we may have this problem throughout our talk, so bear with me. The Nabis encountered Gauguin in 1889, and he was one of many catalysts that inspired them in their art. They developed their own highly personal internal art focused on the people closest to them. And that gave them the nickname by critics at the time of intimists, or intimism being a technique or a style that focused on these things. Now, they had this word, intimism, but they really had a hard time defining it. So the critic Camille Mauclair, I think, got closest to the definition. He said that intimism allows us to divine the daily tragedy and mystery of ordinary existence. So that's a phrase I hope you'll keep in mind as we go through the show. Pierre Bonnard, for his part, came up with his own definition. He said, intimism, or intimists, allow us to draw emotion from the most modest acts of life. So these are all characteristics that point to intimism. They are small scale paintings and prints. It's a cast of familial characters. It's the warm glow of lamplight, a shared meal, and the affection of a familiar cat or dog. But it is more than just the subject matter that made their work intimate. It was also the emotion that it evoked, and the sense that we are viewing the scene through the artist's eyes. Not just what he saw, but also how he felt. So these are the kind of subjective emotional things that we will see in the exhibition tonight. These artists shared this common interest and used the most ordinary things around them to get to this mystery, magic, tragedy, and poetry of day-to-day living. Now, the interior was at the very heart of intimism, and it is here that we start the exhibition. When you enter the first gallery, which I call, appropriately enough, the intimate interior, you are greeted by this color lithograph. It announces many of the themes in the room. The ordinary moment made somehow magical. We see a small child, probably Bonnard's nephew Charles, playing by the light of an oil lamp. Bonnard creates an entire little world here, with the child absorbed in his play and enclosed by the lamplight. His abstract style, flattening, and creative use of the lithographic crayon make this more a portrait of a mood rather than a portrait of little Charles. Now, the same could be said of Pierre Bonnard's many images of people dining. Dining is one of the most ordinary things of our lives, but also one of the most intimate. I've often thought, is it any wonder that it's part of a religious ritual for so many religions, the act of breaking bread together? In this painting, we see Pierre Bonnard's sister, André, and you will get to know her very well by the end of the talk. She's seated at a table with a wonderful little cat cradled in her right arm, and the cat, you will notice, is dipping its paw into her meal. André is clothed in a magnificent checkered blouse that fills the picture frame and flows with a life of its own. And the kitty cat, while it looks a little bit abstract and hard to pick out, adds to the feeling that we are witnessing a very casual moment. This is not high society. This is not an elegant dinner party, but just a moment of a woman and her cat. Now, as you go through the exhibition, and as we will see tonight, you will see many, many images of cats and dogs. And there are a couple of reasons for this. Perhaps the most important is that this was the kind of dawn of modern pet keeping. This was when there were more and more veterinarians for domestic animals. There were pet stores. This was the moment when they invented commercial dog food. And people began to think of these domesticated animals as members of their family. So that's one strong reason when I say that we are seeing friends and family, that includes the cats and dogs. Another reason they are so popular with these artists is that they are wonderfully free of sort of the adult strictures that bind us in our daily life. Animals, like young children, are thought to live in the present moment only, and thus they are excellent proxies for us to examine the ordinary, the close at hand, and the things that might otherwise go unnoticed. For this reason, Bonnard freely employed the use of distortion when he's depicting cats and dogs and also babies. So keep that in mind for a later moment, because we are going to see some very strange babies indeed. You will meet nearly all of Bonnard's family members in this exhibition. Here I show you another dining scene, and left from right, you see Bonnard's own mother, Elizabeth Bonnard, and she's seated next to young Jean, André's firstborn child, while Charles is seated on André's lap. And you'll notice that there's this beautiful orchestration of glances among the figures there. Madame Bonnard is looking after little Jean, who's gripping the soup spoon in this very awkward overhand grip. André is attending to Charles, and it is only Charles who is looking out at us, regarding us or the painter with a serene expression. You'll also notice that this painting has sort of a hazy sense to it, a hazy quality, as if filtered through memory and time. We know that the Nabi artist never painted from live models, but only from memory, which accounts for one layer of remove. Furthermore, Bonnard is not attempting to give us a photographic snapshot of a specific moment in time, but to suggest a mood and a moment. The goal, as the poet Mallarmé exclaimed, was to paint not the thing, but the effect it produces. Vuillard too creates an evocative mood using the same subject, his mother feeding her grandchild, in this case, Vuillard's niece, Annette. This is a tiny painting, just 18 by 24 inches, but it is bursting with pattern, suggestion, and emotion. We enter the scene as oblique observers, peering over Madame Vuillard's shoulder as she offers a spoon to baby Annette. Unlike Bonnard's painting, where we feel we might be invited to pull up a chair to the table, Vuillard excludes the viewer, offering a glimpse, but not necessarily an invitation. The faces of Madame Vuillard and Annette are barely indicated. He offers us not portraits of the sitters, but a portrait of the nurturance symbolized by this modest act of life. For Vuillard, the home was not simply a refuge, but it was also a place of labor. It was there that he did most of his own paintings, and he shared small rented apartments with his mother and sister. His mother operated a corset and dressmaking business from their small space. In this canvas, you see Vuillard's sister Marie seated by an open window and bent over her sewing. Now, oftentimes when you see images of women sewing, you think, oh, it's a hobby. And I would argue that a lot of women's labor is invisible this way, but this is no hobby. This is Marie laboring, working to help support the family. She's seated by an open window. There was no electric light to help her in her careful stitch work. This slide is a little dark, but when you come to the exhibition, I hope you appreciate the wonderful patterning and also the very sophisticated geometry of windows, table, and this wonderful crisscross pattern behind her. This painting may seem familiar to you or may recall another image that I share with you now. And this is, of course, Johannes Vermeer's painting, The Lace Maker, that hangs in the Louvre in Paris today, just as it did when Vuillard was a young art student. And so Intimism was definitely looking at these artistic precedents, like the work of Vermeer. And you'll notice that they share, although painted in a different style, they share this same intense intense devotion to these women who are deeply absorbed in their work in what is for them a very, very ordinary moment of the day. More women's work and labor can be seen in another wonderful image from the Cleveland Museum of Art. I should mention that the Cleveland Museum of Art and the Portland Art Museum were full partners in this show, each contributing roughly half of the I think about 50 works each from each institution, and then loans from another 40 lenders across the world. So after you've enjoyed the show here in Portland, make sure you make it to Cleveland to see their marvelous permanent collection, including this sumptuous little picture of Vuillard's mother sweeping. And a marvelous detail I only noticed quite a bit later after the catalog was finished is that in the lower left, you will see, I think, Vuillard's own little slippered feet intruding into the canvas. So Vuillard is seated doing his work, which is that of a painter, while his mother is attending to her own chores after her long day of work. I also want to make sure to invite you to the December lecture when Dr. Francesca Berry will talk about Vuillard's remarkable relationship with his mother, with whom he lived until her death when he was 60 years old. So there are many things to comment on in this first gallery, and we should really keep moving, but we simply cannot leave without examining this stunning group of color lithographs entitled Landscapes and Interiors by Vuillard. And they were published in 1899. They are the high point of his graphic career. And he presents us with a number of, again, very ordinary, but also very poignant moments. Here we are in the parlor of his good friends and his patrons, the Natensons, Thaddée and Monsieur Natenson, enjoying a game of checkers on the left. And I have to pause and give a shout out to the Graphic Arts Council of the Portland Art Museum, who funded this purchase just a matter of a few short weeks ago. And on the right is a beautiful image of Monsieur Natenson, again, seated in the parlor. If you look really closely, you'll recognize that same sort of tulip flared lamp in both images. And this, again, was a recent acquisition funded by a dear friend of the museum. Now, these are cozy images that bring forth maybe thoughts of contentment, maybe a night like tonight where it's pouring down rain and pitch black in Portland, Oregon. But Vuillard was also able to suggest other moods in his lithographic suite. This is perhaps the high point of this very high point in his career. 3 individual lithographs entitled Interior with Pink Wallpaper 1, 2, and 3. And they evoke a lot of different emotions in different viewers. We are first struck with their optical beauty, just wonderful pinks and reds and yellows running riot across the 3 sheets. We're also struck by its perplexing composition. It's not entirely clear if we're in one space, we're sort of surrounded by the wallpaper, and right in the middle of it is this fabulous oil lamp, the chandelier that hangs from the ceiling and disrupts our view of the figures behind it. Now, these hidden figures are somewhat magical and also disturbing. In each sheet, there is a person going about her business. On the final sheet, there is a woman and maybe a small child behind her. So we're offered glimpses of this interior, but there is no way out. It is a hothouse environment that Vuillard captures of his mother, his sister, and their lives together. So this is a great chance to think about what are the ambivalent feelings we have about home life. In the exhibition catalog, we write about how this verges on what the theory that Freud was just starting to develop of the uncanny, the home-like home, where the home is the source of everything familiar, but also a source of anxiety as well. And that's the perfect transition to our next gallery, which we call the troubled interior. And exhibit A for the troubled interior is this fabulous painting that comes to us from the Museum of Modern Art, just very, very freshly cleaned and ready to shine in this exhibition. It depicts Vuillard's mother. She's seated there in the center in a very sort of assertive pose, and his sister Marie again. And what visitors notice right away is that there seems to be some sort of unspoken drama here. What's happening between Madame Vuillard and Marie? Why is Marie bent in that position? Is she trying to disappear into the wallpaper, or is she emerging from it magically? You'll notice when you come to see the picture in Portland that the floorboards seem to be slanting up and they're zooming back behind the figures, while the cupboard behind Madame Vuillard looks like it's in danger of tipping over her. What is Vuillard trying to tell us? We don't know. And that's one of the reason I think their work still has so much interest and pique to us today, is because he provides all these clues. He sets up the actors, he gives us the props, but we have no idea what is going on. And he asks us to complete that circuit of meaning and provide the answer. And I discover every time I go through the galleries with a friend or a family member, everyone seems to come to a different conclusion. Now, of the 4 artists, none better exploited the emotional richness of ambiguity than Felix Vallotton. And in 1897-98, he published a suite of 10 woodblock prints entitled Intimacies. And here I show you the cover of the book. This is very, very rare, and this is in the collection of the Van Gogh Museum. And you'll see that the cover doesn't really tell us much about what we are going to see. The title is quite anodyne. It tells us that we might see scenes of private or romantic life, and in fact, that is what he delivers. In each image, Vallotton presents a man and a woman in an interior scene. At first, we are drawn to the romantic elements, but the titles, each of which is carved in a tiny cartouche in the bottom of the composition, give lie to the scenes in front of us. So let me pull up the title on this one. Those of you who read French already know that this scene is entitled Money. What appears to be a romantic moment at a balcony, we learn, in fact, is a financial transaction. Is he negotiating terms with his kept woman? Is the husband questioning where his wife has spent the money? Or perhaps is the woman waiting for an answer for his failed financial affairs? Again and again, Vallotton presents tiny one-act dramas between a man and a woman, each endowed with a suggestive elliptical title. In this scene, an elegantly dressed woman who is wearing a fashionable muff and has a little artificial bird perched on her hat is bending down to receive a kiss from her husband before going out. Now, while the scene appears innocent, Vallotton has conditioned us to suspect deception. Is the peaceful dove an ironic emblem of the faithlessness of the wife who gives some sort of cogent reason to slip out of the house to meet her lover? It is clear that Vallotton gave these tantalizing titles a great deal of thought. In the preparatory study for this print, he jotted down a whole list of potential titles, which I will pull up now. First, he wrote, getting ready for a visit, then getting ready to go out. Next, disquieting outing, or the pressing errand, gloomy forebodings, and finally, suspicion. So although he chose the most innocent sounding of these titles, getting ready for a visit, it was clear that he wished to represent a charged moment. Vallotton, you may have picked up, was the pessimist of the group. While he focused intently on family life and interiors, he didn't shy away from the drama of private life. He believed that the relationship between men and women could only be described as that, as victor and vanquished. He was an equal opportunity misanthrope, however. In some prints, it is the woman who weeps, while in other, it is the man's turn to cry into his handkerchief. Vallotton weaves drama and humor throughout the suite, creating what one critic called a delicious, disturbing spectacle that invites us to laugh, to shudder, and to tremble. I encourage you to explore this marvelous view of interior life when you are in the exhibition. The 10 sheets can be arranged in any order. And in fact, Heather in Cleveland, when the show was up this summer in Cleveland, she selected one series of events while I arranged them in another. When you are in the exhibition, I invite you to do so in your imagination. Please don't touch the prints on the wall. Come up with a series that makes the most compelling story in your own mind. Our next gallery stop is devoted to music. For the Nabi, the music was intimately tied to the artistic practice. As Edward Vuillard recalled in his journal, there is a species of emotion particular to painting. There is an effect that results from a certain arrangement of colors, of lights, of shadows, etc. It is this that one calls the music of painting. The symbolic language of music suited these painters who sought out the symbolism of everyday life. Like musicians, their goal was to evoke mood, memory, and emotion. A fitting place to start is this portrait of Maurice Denis' wife. And, you know, I'm not sure if you are troubled by this little bar above. I'm going to try to move it. There we go. Sorry, I had my Zoom controls over my images. I apologize if it's been there the whole time. Here we see Maurice Denis' wife. It's a marvelous image right from the beginning of their courtship and marriage, and you'll see that he uses sort of musical elements to describe her. That is, he uses distortion to create this beautiful arabesque of her figure, of her pulled back hair, and he orchestrates wonderful curves and lines that are suggestive of music. The fabulous patterned wallpaper behind her too is a sense musical, and he further suggests sound as we see her beautiful, elegant hands resting on the ivory keys. So it's a very suggestive image, one that we feel like is just about to burst forward with the music that is seated or set on her stand. Next, we should give some time to, let's see, to this fellow, this smiling, bushy-haired fellow named Claude Terrasse. He married Pierre Bonnard's sister. I'm getting my sisters mixed up, whom you've seen in other images. And Bonnard and Taras became fast friends. Taras was a composer and an organist, and together Taras and Bonnard engaged in two musical endeavors. The first being a small music book for children entitled Le Petit Solfège Illustré, the little illustrated solfeggio, which was meant to teach children basic concepts in music. These are wonderfully entertaining. I'm told that Taras's musical concepts are quite run-of-the-mill, but I can tell you that Bonnard's drawings are anything but. He uses wit and a beautiful flowing line to describe concepts in ways that children could understand. So for instance, on the right, you see a fabulous image where he describes a whole note like a very stout woman who's taking up the entire measure. In the next image, two slender women represent quarter notes. They don't get as much time, while a slightly less rotund woman is a half note. And the women keep getting slimmer and slimmer to indicate smaller notes, a theme he uses throughout the book. It's a very good humored and light touch, I think, and this was one of the most satisfying things for me to work on in the exhibition. Together, Heather and I gathered many preparatory studies for this book. So you will have the chance to see the book and many of the studies on the wall. Their next musical project was not intended for children, but it was nonetheless still focused on family life. Taras composed 19 pieces for piano, and Bonnard supplied the illustrations for this book. This is a wonderful image to start with. It's the first in the series of the piano book. And what we see is a portrait of the composer, Claude Taras, with his wonderful little moustache, next to his wife, Andre, and they are cradling their firstborn child, Jean. Now, if you look very closely, you will make out the profile of Madame Bonnard, Bonnard's mother. So it is a portrait of 4 family members with whom he is so intimately familiar. Now, Heather and I wanted to know what the music sounded like, and neither of us were up to snuff in terms of playing the piano music. So I'm extremely grateful for the resources of the Cleveland Museum of Art. And Cleveland, as many of you know, has an outstanding music scene and many very fine musical schools. And so the Cleveland Museum of Art commissioned this young pianist, Arseny Gusev, to record the music that you see here in this slide. So you will have Gusev's music accompanying you throughout the exhibition, and particularly in this gallery. We next move to family life, and here we see a marvelous image of Maurice Denis' wife, Marthe, bathing their young child, Bernadette. Now, in each gallery, one artist tends to kind of rise to the forefront. And I would say that Maurice Denis steals the scene in family life. Of the 4 artists, he was the only one to marry in the 1890s. And his wife, Marthe, was his enduring muse, as were his children. So in the course of that decade, they had 3 children, Jean-Paul, who died very young, Noël and Bernadette, and then another 6 children would follow. So he had ample opportunities to observe children in his life. I think this painting is extraordinary because what he does with a very ordinary, simple moment. Many of us have gone through the ritual of bathing a child, and I think he captures this moment of equipoise as the child is wiggling and examining her toes. The mother has her arms gracefully arranged in a perfect balance between her 2 arms. And I think it's almost musical in the way that he orchestrates these lines that flow down her dress, almost independent of the body beneath it. It is both an extremely ordinary moment, but somehow magical and enduring. And I think that's one reason that visitors are so attracted to this image. I'm also extremely pleased. I don't believe this picture has ever been shown in the United States. But I'm so grateful that we were given the license to go and do our research in person prior to the pandemic, and to meet the collectors who could really enhance the show with rarely seen masterpieces like this one. Pierre Bonnard, like Denis, was also acutely interested in babies. Now, I mentioned earlier, he treated babies and dogs and cats as members of another world. They were unaffected by the strictures of polite society. They were independent of our rules, and they're also just sort of strange creatures. He captures this in his image on the left, which we believe was an announcement, a birth announcement. And I love how he merges the child and its wiggly limbs and tiny little fingers and toes into this cabbage leaf. Now, if you're wondering why a cabbage leaf, there's a good scientific reason. For just as storks deliver babies here in the United States, in France, you must look for babies under cabbage leaves. And so here he makes this little verbal joke, and he mixes the vegetal and the human in this one outstanding line drawing, which he then cut out to the shape of the cabbage leaf. On the right, we see one of Bonnard's most accomplished lithographs. Again, this one from the Cleveland Museum of Art. Here, once again, we see Andre. She's wearing another beautiful patterned blouse or dress, and she is holding baby Jean. They might be in a garden setting as indicated from the green background, and perhaps most extraordinary of all is Bonnard's inclusion of his own profile at lower right. He never depicted himself during this stage of his career, or if he did, it might just be his elbow or his pipe poking into the picture. But for him to include himself in such a prominent, though I guess also oblique way, I think points to the importance he placed on the arrival of baby Jean and of the primacy of family life in his emotional world and his artistic world as well. In another letter to Vuillard, he wrote about this time, "I am 1,000 times more astounded by my little nephew's face than by anything I've seen in all my travels." I think some of Bonnard's awe is apparent in this exhibition, as well as his appreciation for the very strangeness that you can find in familiarity, in this case, in the world of the infant and the small child. So I've also often wondered, Bonnard did not shy away from the baby's kind of slightly crossed eyes that newborns have, or a still kind of pointy skull. He respected them for exactly the way they were, and there was no need to alter them. Instead, this type of distortion just adds greater emotion and import. Now, Vuillard too showed great devotion to his family, and here we see little Annette, who you will see many, many times in the exhibition. This painting is perhaps the most psychologically complex of his depictions in the show. It's a rare double portrait depicting with Annette with her father, who was also an artist and also a member of the Nabi. His name was Pierre Xavier Roussel. He is also Vuillard's brother-in-law. Vuillard convinced Roussel, his best friend, to marry his spinster sister. It did not go well. And perhaps you can sense that in this picture where Roussel looks past his young daughter, Annette. He seems utterly unengaged with either her or with his brother-in-law, Vuillard, who is painting the scene. It becomes this complex triangulation of painter, niece, brother-in-law, uncle, niece, brother-in-law, painter to painter. There's so many different ways you can describe this. And while the child looks out with a very warm expression, to me, it leaves a lot to examine of the emotional undercurrent at play. By now, I hope I've conditioned you to expect something a little different from Felix Vallotton. The year is now 1899. Vallotton abruptly dumps his mistress of 10 years, a working class woman named Hélène, and marries Gabrielle Rodriguez Enrique, a wealthy widow with 3 children of her own. Now, this portrait depicts Gabrielle not with her own children, but with her young niece. And the lack of physical contact between the sitters and Gabrielle's cool expression render this a deeply unsettling painting, at least in my own mind. Vallotton contrasts the perfectly composed and coiffed wife with the energetic little girl who crouches at her feet and is busy destroying a piece of paper. Once again, he hints at a narrative, but provides no further details. Estrangement, I believe, is the dominant emotion of this canvas, taking us worlds apart from the child-centric view and the cult of maternity offered by Denis, Bonnard, and Vuillard. I should also mention Vallotton was an artist who's marvelous to study because he left us lots and lots of letters and journals. And I can confirm that he said in his journal that he didn't like children at all. In fact, he much preferred cats. So that goes out to all the cat people out there. Next, we move into the garden, and this is a moment for the dog people. I will show you just one dog tonight, but there are several outstanding pooches in this exhibition. And as we were installing the show a few weeks ago, one of the preparators who was helping with me said, what is the theme of this section? And I said, well, it's called In the Garden. And they said, well, I don't really think it looks like a garden at all. And at first I was slightly piqued, and then I was rather happy because our curatorial thesis is that even when these artists leave the intimate interior, they continue to render their surroundings as if we were back inside their apartments. And by that, I mean, here we see a very tightly cropped view. We're in a garden setting. We can tell by the chrysanthemums, or they might be dahlias in the foreground, the green leaves in the background. And we see exactly who we would expect to see in an interior setting. It is, I will give you one guess and one guess only. It is Andre, Pierre Bonnard's sister, in another beautiful checkered dress. And behind her is their cousin, Bert. And we know that Bonnard was in love with the cousin and in fact proposed marriage to her, which was not nearly as weird in that day as it is today, but she refused him. And so we know the 2 female protagonists, a sister, beloved cousin, and in the lower right-hand corner is his sister's dog, Ravigo. So the dog is there not simply as an emblem of fidelity, but he is there as a named individual, a member of the family. As in other instances, you see a beautiful orchestration of glances and gestures. Bert's leaning over and putting her hand on Andre's shoulder. Andre, in turn, reaches down towards the pup, and he himself, the little dog, lifts his own paw to greet her. So again, it's this wonderful orchestration of familial and tender glances rendered in this tightly composed way that suggests an intimate moment rather than a sprawling garden. In this charming painting, very rarely seen painting, it was recently given to the Cleveland Museum of Art, we see another type of garden. Again, a garden that sort of disappointed my preparator. Instead of rows and rows of flowers, it's an enclosed garden in which a woman is hanging her laundry to dry under the moonlight, which, according to custom, would bleach it a brighter shade of white. Denis loved enclosed gardens, and those of you who know your Christian iconography will know that the enclosed garden is an attribute of the Virgin. It symbols purity and a separate space. So in this quiet moment, Denis suggests this kind of privacy, both through the enclosed walls of the garden and also by this intimate moonlight setting where the darkness seems to bring us even closer in to the scene before us. All the action is restricted to the woman's upraised arms as she hangs the linens on the line. It is, again, a small but extremely moving painting full of emotion and memory and intimacy. We move now from this private garden into a more public space. But as you saw before, Heather and I believe that even when these artists were depicting public spaces, they again feel very intimate and they focus on these familial relationships. Here we are in what I think is perhaps one of the most startling images in the exhibition. It's again a tiny canvas that is so daringly abstract. Down the center is this bold line that indicates a tree trunk. And to the left of it, we just get the hint of two chairs, the types of chairs that many of us will recognize from French gardens that you can move around. It's probably the Jardin des Tuileries, the Tuileries Gardens, just steps away from Vuillard's home. He depicts a nanny holding a big bundle of white, which we presume is a little infant swaddled in white clothing, and behind her trails a small boy in a blue sailor suit. He grasps her skirts and turns back to look at the family group behind him, barely indicated with some daubs of black to suggest hats, these popular little triangular coats that women wear, and with them a little girl in a bright red dress and hat. And Vuillard suggests, but he doesn't delineate, these children are sharing a glance across the gravel, perhaps ruining the end of playtime. It's such an emotional punch for such a tiny painting, and just barely suggested. When you come to see it, you'll see that he let a lot of the background come through. I think it's painted on board. So he just uses the loosest strokes to suggest, but not to depict this place, which really gets to the heart of this intimate project, to suggest, to not to define the thing, but to merely suggest it. Another great highlight of this section in the garden is, as we move from the private garden to the public garden, we see this amazing lithographic screen from the Cleveland Museum of Art. And here, let me show you how it looks installed. I don't have a picture of it installed in Portland yet, but here it is in the Cleveland installation from the summer. And you'll notice that when the screen is folded, it immediately springs to life. Now I'm going to go back so we can see it a little bit perhaps clearer here. What we have is an image of a mother and three children who are rolling hoops and ushering their family pets along across the Place de la Concorde on the way home from the Tuileries Gardens. Now it's interesting that even though this is an urban motif, Bonnard is adapting it for interior use. This would be used as a room divider in a Parisian home. And when doing so, he still sticks to topics very close to family life. So in this case, a mother, her children, the family pets, and behind them, a row of three nannies. And we know them to be nannies because of their distinctive bonnets with the long trailing ribbons. Along the top edge of the screen, we again see more dogs and a row of cab horses. So Bonnard gives us this taste of the exterior of the public garden, but also he returns it back to the home with these motifs of family life. Now, our final section of the exhibition and catalog looks at the Nabi city. And this is the first painting to greet you in the Portland installation. It is, I like to joke, Pierre Bonnard is an artist who would have been very well suited to the coronavirus quarantine, because it seems that his favorite way to experience the city was by staying home and looking out the window. In this luminous canvas, he does just that. He stands in his studio window and gazes out at the nocturnal world of Paris. Now, keep in mind that this is the exact same moment when his friends, like Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, would be heading to the Moulin Rouge, or to the brothel, or to the dance hall, or to any number of restaurants. But for Bonnard, the city was best captured in this sort of nocturnal, dreamy mood. And one little detail I love is that you'll see across the view four little bright lights shining in the distance, indicating perhaps another night owl like him enjoying the view from his room. My favorite print in this section is perhaps this lithograph entitled Houses in a Courtyard. It is again another view from his studio. You see this interest in geometry and the rigor with which he constructs the composition, but you also notice this fabulous human element, and that's the image of a woman across the way shaking out her linens. In another painting that we asked for but were not able to borrow, I show you here. This comes from the Smith College Museum of Art. You get this same view out this same window, and once again you see his same interest in the human element. In this case, in the painting, it's a tiny little bird cage perched on the windowsill of the open window. I should have mentioned that as we move into the Nabis city, the exhibition narrows and focuses just on the work of Vuillard and Bonnard, for they were the two Nabi artists who engaged the most with this topic. In this beautiful lithograph, just recently acquired by the museum with funds from a generous donor, Jill Garvey and her husband, we see three young girls crossing a bridge in Paris, the Pont de l'Europe. And this bridge was considered a technological marvel, yet he gives us very little hint of that. Instead, we see a tall girl next to a smaller girl holding a baby in her arms. So again, the focus is on this kind of intimate moment of these three figures. And it's such a useful comparison. Heather Lamonides Brown, my co-author and co-curator, used this comparison in the exhibition catalog. So this is a great example of how the Nabi were different from the Impressionists. On the right, you see the work by one of the founding members of the Impressionist group, Gustave Caillebotte, and he is painting the exact same scene. But for Caillebotte, all of the interest is on the technology, the rivets in the bridge, the strength of the steel girders, and you can see that the men are looking down and over towards the steam that is rising from the locomotives that are exiting the Saint-Lazare train station. So it's a wonderful contrast in this sort of masculine, the men kind of in this crisply delineated painting, marveling at the technology, while Vuillard instead is creating something rather dreamy or hazy, as if he is recalling a distant emotion or memory of glimpsing these young girls crossing the bridge. Another view, and perhaps I should say maybe among the favorites of mine, and also I think of Heather's in the exhibition, is this charming view of by Vuillard of a child wearing a wonderful fluffy orange scarf. She's bedecked with a blue headband and a spotted red dress. And this comes from right at the start of his career. He gives a great deal of attention and dignity to the little girl who seems to be skipping across the pavement. And in fact, he gives almost no attention to her lumbering male companion, presumably her father, who we don't even see his head. He's cut off at the shoulders. He's rendered in blocky forms, in nondescript grays and browns. Instead, it is the child who is our access point into the city and provides all the light and color. Now, in one of my favorite days from all the research days that we had together, Heather and I were in Washington, D.C. We spent the morning at the National Gallery of Art, talking to curators, asking for loans. We saw this wonderful painting. Then we walked outside, had a bite of lunch, and walked over to see this marvelous little painting, also by Vuillard, about probably less than a mile away from the National Gallery, housed in the Dumbarton Oaks Museum. It comes from exactly 10 years later in his career. But again, we're back to this image of a child experiencing the city. I love how he incorporates the geometry of the exterior, how he limits all the color and life to this little child who's just trying to peek over the edge of the railing. She's got her little hand on the top and has managed to pull her eyes and nose over the railing to peer out at the city. Notice the geometry and the patterning and the fact that the child is right at this liminal space between public and private. And she seems to be deciding what is best. Now, if I can project my own emotions here, I would say this is also Vuillard championing the superiority of interior life to city life. Here we have a city view, but to me, he seems like he is entirely on the side of the private, the interior, the circumspect family life rather than public life. Now, I see I've gone a bit over, so I'm going to stop here. If you have more questions or you're dying to know more, I would encourage you to pick up our catalog. All these topics and more are covered in some depth. And there's also, if you are very, very curious, a podcast conversation between me and Heather. There's a viewing guide you can pick up when you enter the exhibition. And there are also lots and lots of gallery labels. So as we end our discussion tonight, I invite you to think back to the critic Camille Mauclair's definition of intimism. And I invite you to think about your own daily lives. Can you point to the daily tragedy and mystery of ordinary existence? What modest acts of life are carrying meaning in your own world? Who is the closest to you in your space? And that can be whether human, canine, or feline. One of the great gifts of the show is that I feel like it gave me an extra appreciation for all the mundane moments in my own household and a great appreciation for my husband, my children, my 2 cats, and yes, even the hedgehog with whom I shared the quarantine. So I hope this exhibition will also grant you access to those reserves of emotion as well. Thank you.
Lots of air applause, I think, Mary. We could get lots of claps out in the chat. If we could only hear those all. Lots of thank yous and fabulous job.
Oh, thank you. I apologize for my problems with my mouse. It's always something, right?
Hey, and it's stormy outside. I'm glad my power stayed on. So we have a few questions, and I invite anybody out there who would like to ask a question to do so. Please, add it to the chat or into the Q&A. Either one will work tonight. So yeah, lots of thank yous continue to come in, Mary. So I'm just going to jump in here with a couple questions. The first one, somebody asked about how the representation of people, like it kind of goes back and forth between realistic and more impressionistic. Mm-hmm. And can you kind of shed some light on like what that duality sort of maybe meant and like artistic choices around that? Like why make those decisions?
Oh, I love that question.
And does that speak to symbolism? Because somebody else asked about symbolism and some of the characteristics of symbolism.
Okay, that's great. And I love the way you framed that. I'm going to work backwards. So symbolism is a term that we can use to describe much of the art of the 1890s. It's a big umbrella, and you can put Gauguin in there. You can put any number of artists there, and the Nabi occupy kind of a slice of that symbolist pie. So the question about these realistic versus more impressionistic styles is, I'm so glad it came up because each artist had his own style. So Vallotton favored a real crisp, kind of icy presentation. They referred to Vallotton as the fire beneath the ice, whereas Denis had sort of almost like a neo-Renaissance depiction, especially his Mart's beautiful round face. And Bonnard and Vuillard were much more abstract. And I think that you're absolutely right to talk about it as an artistic strategy, because I think ambiguity was part of that. And there is a section in the catalog where we talk about these are portraits of known people, but they're also generalized to the point where they could be anyone. And it's not an either or, it's an and. So the artist's friends would all say, oh, that's Madame Vuillard, or that's Andre Terrasse. They would recognize them, but it also grants them maybe a level of privacy as well, and gives them the kind of the opportunity to be more relevant to us 100 years later. So it seems strange that blurry painting can be an artistic strategy, but I think that's exactly what they were going for. And in fact, there's this great quote, I can't remember, it's from a fellow artist, and he goes to see a Vuillard exhibition, and he says, I just don't understand. For the love of God, the man knows how to paint, but why won't he give anybody hands or faces? So we know them to be highly trained draftsmen. They had classical artistic education. They could certainly draw hands and faces, but these were in fact artistic strategies.
Yeah. A couple questions have come in sort of about the artists themselves. And one question, sort of interesting, how well known and popular were the Nabi in their lifetime? Or while they were the Nabi?
Not very. They were part of this artistic milieu. They were very young. I mean, they were in like late teenagers when they formed their group. So we're talking 22, 23, 24. They got exhibitions, and they were they were popular amongst themselves, but they had to resort to other strategies. So for instance, Maurice Denis would often write reviews of their exhibitions under a pseudonym. And they complained, like Vallotton during this time, he really complained about not having enough money. And it, not to be too cynical, but I really think that's why he dumped his mistress and married Gabrielle. I mean, he wanted a secure financial life. Vuillard was still kind of being supported by his mother. He was still living with his mom. And Bonnard, let's see, how was he doing financially? You know, he was getting by, but none of them were getting rich. And that's the time to be a struggling artist, is in your young 20s, I think.
Yeah, it's funny when you mention that. I had a professor in college, NYU. You and I are both NYU alums. Ken Silver, you might remember him.
I do.
He had this theory, especially at the turn of the century, that artists were banding together, like sort of of course, this is like a period in scientific discovery when you had like duos, like the Wright brothers or the Curies. And there was this like strategy with artists to band together, to have like as a strategy, you know, in an intentional way to like kind of like not legitimize themselves exactly, but to be, you know, a collective that was, you know, sort of equated, you know, with great discoveries. So I wonder if like that kind of thinking might have been part of their own young thinking.
Oh, I love that, Stephanie. Yes, I'm going to claim that and use that in my next talk.
That's Ken Silver.
In some ways, they were banding together for safety and for fun. I mean, it was a big world out there. Paris was the self-proclaimed capital of the 19th century, right? All the artists from all over Europe and North America flocked there to study and to learn. They were little fish in a big pond, but together, these close relationships really allowed them to test out ideas against each other. And they were also just really goofy young men. Like they gave each a secret nickname. They gathered at another Nabis home. They called it the temple, and had, you know, goofy rituals, but it really helped them to gain recognition and have that emotional support and artistic support. And I should go back and say, when I say they didn't have a lot of recognition, I will say, no, they did well in the avant-garde circles. So they were well known amongst avant-garde artists, and also amongst the avant-garde theater and literature and poetry. So I should have given them a little bit more credit there.
And then kind of a follow-up question that came in was, who did the Nabi influence? So what's their legacy in terms of artists that we're maybe looking back to them?
Okay, I'm going to make a big claim. Are you ready? I think they influenced, I don't think I can say all of 20th century art, but a whole swath of it. They didn't have any direct kind of descendants, but in their use of color, I think the Fauves were influenced by them. In their use of exaggeration, the Expressionists. And in Bonnard's astounding color, I think he was very influential on Henri Matisse. So those are big claims. And I think Heather and I hope to back them up with a future exhibition. But one of the reasons they're not, the Nabi aren't real well known is they didn't have kind of direct descendants, artistic descendants. And their styles changed after the 20th century. I mean, Vallotton gets really, really weird. And, you know, a lot of people get turned off. Denis gets super, super Catholic, and Christ starts appearing in all of his paintings. Vuillard starts painting society members, and Bonnard goes into this exploration of pure color. So they scatter after about 1900, and I think that's one of the reasons that these artists as a movement aren't as well known, say, as the Impressionists to us today.
Here's kind of an interesting question about sort of the intimate intimism, and like the kind of cut off tableaus, the sort of like it seems like it's part of a larger picture, but you're getting a very specific like look or perspective. And is that like a trademark of the Nabi?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I'm glad that came through, or that you could tell it was a repeated motif. Yeah, these paintings are small, and that is part of the aesthetic, that they were meant to be viewed in small interior spaces. They're not grand paintings to be hung in that national art, you know, the salons that occurred every year. And by cropping the edges so tightly, they do exactly what your questioner mentioned. They suggest that there's more going on. There's more beyond the scene. But the tight frame keeps us into this really intimate moment. Some of our viewers may have noticed a strong affiliation with ukiyo-e prints, Japanese art that was starting to enter the market in Paris at this time. And that's a wonderful, that can be a whole nother exhibition about the Japanese influence here.
Here's a question about Mary Cassatt. And this person asks, these feel very similar to Mary Cassatt's work. Was there a connection between them?
Yes, that's a great question. And it's something I wish, you know, each of these 5 sections in the catalog could have been its own exhibition. And I would have loved the space to dive into Mary Cassatt and the Nabi, because when you think about it, she's quite a bit older. She is established, she is famous, she's hanging out with the Impressionists and Degas. And these are, like I said, 19-year-old boys. But they surely saw her work. And I'm thinking most particularly of her color aquatints that were also a series of prints that depict the lives of women and children. And I think, I need Heather here, I think those were published in 1891. And I'm fairly certain that they saw them exhibited.
Okay, I'm trying to just work through a couple more here. I think we'll do 2 more. Where does the name Nabi come from, and how does it translate?
Oh, well, it comes from one of the members of the group loved foreign languages, and he said that it was from the Hebrew Nabiim, meaning prophets. I have people tell me that it wasn't a very good translation, but again, we're talking about 19-year-old boys. They needed a cool nickname. And I should point out that they never exhibited under that name. Again, it was like their little secret thing that kept them united. So during the 1890s, you'd never see, you know, exhibition of the Nabi painters and printmakers. It was just for their consumption only.
Somebody wants to know what their names for each other were.
Oh, okay, these are great. Bonnard was called the very Japanese Nabi because of the influence of Japanese art you can see in his work. Maurice Denis was called the Nabi of beautiful icons. And perhaps you can see that in the fact that a lot of his mother and child images look like Madonna and child or Christian icons. Let's see. Oh, Vallotton was called the foreign Nabi because he was Swiss, but he was also foreign in other ways. His style was so different. His emotional temperature was so different. And the final nickname was for Vuillard, and they called him the Zouave Nabi. And that's a little bit ambiguous. Zouaves were soldiers who fought in North Africa. And we're not entirely sure how he got that nickname. It may have been a reference to the fact that Vuillard's father was in the military, or it may be to the fact that these soldiers all wore this pointed type of beard that Vuillard also wore. So, you know, you got to have a good nickname if you're going to be in a secret club.
Yes, yes. Okay, so the last question I'm going to ask you is, people want you to know how excellent this exhibition is. And it opened in Cleveland. It's here in Portland, but it's not going anywhere after Portland. So why is a show like this not traveling more? Because it's so excellent and so much time and effort has gone into it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It was a lot of time and effort, but it also has a lot of treasures. So we've asked people to loan us their paintings, drawings, and prints for what will be almost a year. You know, when you factor in transportation and travel, a lot of private lenders don't want to be away from their precious objects. There are also so many works on paper in the show. It is predominantly, in fact, on paper, about 100 prints and drawings and 40, 50 paintings. And the works on paper are all very light sensitive. So they will be shown, they were shown in Cleveland, they'll be shown in Portland, and then they'll go back into the vault. So come see them while you can.
Yeah, and I think that's a good reminder. Every time I've been through the exhibition, I have just said to myself, oh, good, it's up for a couple months. I can keep coming back because it's one of those shows. I mean, the work is so lovely, so intimate, and I've enjoyed watching people close together who have come together, looking closely and talking to each other. It lends itself to that kind of experience. So I hope all of you out there, if you are close to Portland or can get to Portland, can come see it and visit it many times, because it's that kind of show. So thank you, Mary, so much. You are a gem, and we're lucky to have you on staff, and congratulations really on just a stellar exhibition. And so thank you to everybody out there who has joined us tonight and stuck with us through the Q&A. I just want to remind you that we have 2 more lectures in this series, generously funded by the Robert Lehman Foundation. So mark your calendars for December 5th at 2 o'clock. That's a Sunday. And we'll have Dr. Francesca Berry, and she's going to talk about living together, working together, Edward Vuillard and his mother. We know moms are very important to this story. And then January 13th at 5:30, we'll have Dr. Natalia Loricella, and she will speak about printmaking in 1890s Paris, Auguste Clos, and the Nabi. So I know Mary's very excited for both of these talks. They're both scholars that she is big fans of. And so we hope that you two will join us December 5th, January 13th. We hope that we will see you in the galleries. If you loved tonight, and I know many of you have said how wonderful you thought tonight was, we are going to post a recording of this talk onto the museum's YouTube channel. That will probably be up within a couple days. It will include captioning and ASL. For those of you who had some trouble tonight watching this on your phone and getting the ASL interpretation, we will look into that. Zoom often updates things, and we don't know when they do that. So thanks for bearing with us. So with that, I will sign off, and we hope to see you at the museum. Thanks again for joining us. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, everyone. Good night.